As the New Orleans Saints wide receivers continue to impress, young rookie Chris Olave is turning into a star. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always. Make Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media. Find me over at CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Daily fantasy football made the way that it should be. You simply pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projections, and with that, you get those right, and you could win up to 10 times your entry. And first-time users can get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 by simply using the promo code LOCKEDON at prizepicks.com. Tell you more about them later, but right now, I want to tell you about Chris Olave, who has been an absolute star so far this season. We're getting to some of your questions for a Twitter Tuesday today, and I'm going to give you some of the advanced analytics on the defense and the way that the defense has played, particularly on the defensive line, drawing some question marks, but some confidence coming from the secondary. So let's start off here with Chris Olave, though, and let's kind of get a look at Chris Olave in the full spectrum of the New Orleans Saints wide receivers, as well as kind of compared to the league on average as well. One of the biggest issues for the New Orleans Saints in 2021 was that their receiver core wasn't really getting the separation necessary in order to be able to make plays. Now, when they did, they were able to take advantage of it. That all worked very well. You think about Deontay Hardy last year, the big, downfield touchdowns in the Green Bay game and the Washington game, all of that. So they found their moments, and a guy like Marquez Callaway just got better and better all year. But sort of across the board and in a general sense, separation was a little bit of a concern for the Saints. And we knew coming into the season that would be a place that they would improve. Jarvis, Landry, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, all of these guys, masters of separation. It looks different for each of the players, though. They each do it sort of in a different way. Michael Thomas's separation can be a 1 yard bit of separation, but that makes him open because he's Michael Thomas and his contested catch ability, his catch radius is that good. Jarvis Landry is subtle, and because of his subtle movements and things like that, he's able to come out of breaks and be a yard, 2 yards beyond the defender and where the defender expected him to be, something that Marshawn Lattimore once highlighted out the wide receiver during training camps. So where does Chris Olave differ? Well, Chris Olave differs because of course, his speed, right? He has breakaway speed that allows him to be able to create separation downfield. We saw a little bit of a struggle with that in the Dome week 2 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but then we saw that immediately clean up against the Carolina Panthers. He also creates a lot of really good separation immediately off the line of scrimmage, fares extremely well off of press coverage, helps that he's kind of plays that flanker role every now and then, comes back up off the line of scrimmage, so you can't really get a hand on him. But if you can't get a hand on him, then all of a sudden he's already past you. So like I mentioned, we'll take a look at it as in sort of what the New Orleans or what Chris Olave is and has been, not only within the framework of the New Orleans Saints wide receiver core and tight end core in terms of creating separation, but also against the league as a whole, or at least comparing it to the league as a whole. So for the straight week, Chris Olave has surpassed the NFL sort of average separation for that week. Remember, separation is measured usually by taking a look at the plays where a player is targeted or catches a pass. So these aren't, on an every down basis, seeing where, separation is being created and stuff like that. This is looking at where he's targeted, where Jameis Winston is getting the ball. Now, the thing about that is that 25 times over the past 2 weeks, Chris Olave has been targeted. So you're getting a pretty good sample size here when you look at it. The average across the NFL right now, according to Next Gen Stats and our friends over at Zebra Sports, is 2.91 yards of separation per target. So that means that players are on average creating about 3 yards of space, just under 3 yards of space between themselves and their nearest defender when they're being targeted across the NFL. Chris Olave is a full yard 0.06 ahead of that at 3.97 yards. He's creating nearly 4 yards of separation when targeted in last week's game against the Carolina Panthers. And he wasn't even first on the list for the New Orleans Saints here in that game. And the funny thing is that the person that was number one is one of the guys that struggled to create that separation last year in 2022, Traquan Smith, who created over 4 yards of separation, 4.23 yards of separation on the plays in which he was targeted. Jarvis Landry wasn't far behind Chris Olave at 3.17. And as we mentioned, Michael Thomas just does it differently. 1 yard of separation is open, wide open for Michael Thomas. Thomas had his season best last week, 2.04 yards after 2.02 yards of separation was averaged by him on targets and catches against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 2. So he has created more and more separation each week. Now, of course, Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Traquan Smith, all managing injuries. Traquan Smith, probably the most serious of the three with it being a concussion. They all did make the trip here to London. I'm in London, by the way. Sorry, probably should have said that. But I'm here. I'm safe. I made it. All the good stuff. So you have those 3 wide receivers that are dealing with those injuries, but you're seeing how special they are and how even amongst how special this wide receiver group is as a whole that features guys like Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, that Chris Olave consistently rises to the top. 147 catches in that game against the Carolina Panthers. That's the largest single game, or excuse me, the 5th largest single game total for any wide receiver in their first year as a New Orleans Saint. Him being targeted, 17 times over the course of his first 3 games. That's tied for second most amongst rookie wide receivers in their first year in franchise history for the New Orleans Saints over the course of their first 3 games, tied with Michael Thomas, who was targeted at the same rate as a rookie, just behind Brandon Cooks, who was targeted for 1 more than that, and then just behind Reggie Bush, who leads all of them, including non-wide receivers with, I believe it's 19 targets. That sits him at the top of that list in 3 games. So, or in that player's first 3 games with the New Orleans Saints, sorry. So, Chris Olave's a star, y'all. Like, he has the qualities. He is somebody that understands how to work with play flow with a scrambling quarterback. He understands how to change his route based upon the space that he's being given by opposing defenses. He's creating separation. He's making big time catches down the field. He's making big time catches in, stressful situations or scrambling situations for the quarterback. And he's making routine catches as well, including ones over on the sideline, over the middle of the field. They're running him in screens. I mean, he's going to continue to get attention. And I wouldn't be surprised if 147 yards in 1 game isn't Chris Olave's highest receiving total once this year is said and done. He's that good, and he continues to get open that much. And not only that, he leads the team in targets. He leads the team in receptions with 17. He leads the team in yards with 268. And by the way, over 220 of those yards are before the catch. The New Orleans Saints have a deep threat. They have a star in the midst in Chris Olave. Now, of course, when you have a star like Chris Olave in the making, you've got to be able to get him the ball. And one of the things that has sort of kept the New Orleans Saints from being able to do that are the lack of turnovers on the defensive side. Also, some offensive line play, some quarterback play. There's a lot that's gone into the New Orleans Saints' slow start this season. But analytically, when we look at all of it, the New Orleans Saints are still in a good place, particularly with where their identity should rest, which is on the defensive side of the football. We'll break it all down, and I'll tell you why that is as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks, because they are the sponsor of today's episode. Prize Picks is daily fantasy football, the way that if you took all of the greatest minds in our history and said, create daily fantasy football, the way that they would have done it. It's very simple. You don't have to play against another lineup. You don't have to go up against spreadsheet warriors. You don't have to go up against people with insider information, all that. It's you versus a projection. So it's you and how well you know your players, your favorite team, the teams that you know or are adjacent to, whatever it might be, or just your favorite players across the NFL. It makes it a lot of fun for watching your games on Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whenever it is that those games are being played. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players and then predict whether or not they're going to come out at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. New Orleans Saints quarterback Jameis Winston just threw for over 300 yards for the first time as a Saints quarterback. So if you took more last week, you won. It's that simple. You do that, you get them right, you can win up to 10 times your entry over at prizepicks.com. And first-time listeners, first-time users can get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 by using the promo code Locked On. All you have to do is go to prizepicks.com, download the mobile app, and you can start playing daily fantasy sports today. Use that promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, they'll give you $100. You deposit $50, they'll give you $50. That's all it takes. Once again, that's promo code Locked On over at prizepicks.com for that 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks so much, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. How is it that a New Orleans Saints defense can simultaneously make you feel concern and confidence at the same time? Well, the New Orleans Saints defense has found a way to do it here in 2022. And it comes down to two different elements of the game. The defensive line, which we'll sort of look at in terms of pass rush, as well as run stopping. We have some metrics to sort of give you an idea of where the New Orleans Saints defense places across the NFL there. But then we'll also take a look at coverage, where the New Orleans Saints have been very good so far this season. So there's a lot to sort of take away from here, but let me tell you what the main takeaways are. The Saints do need to get better in the trenches over on the defensive side. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But the fact that they continue to take away big plays downfield, the big explosive plays, that ends up making a big difference for how they're able to hang around in games. The issue becomes when you are one play short on the defensive side. Last week, the 67-yard catch and run by Laviska Shenault. The week before that, the 28-yard touchdown to Brashad Perriman from Tom Brady against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. When you're one play short, the inconsistencies at other places start to rear their ugly heads a little bit more. But the Saints have been otherwise solid when it comes to their coverage. Let's start with the defensive line, because everything starts and ends with the defensive line, and this is where there's a little bit of concern. ESPN tracks pass rush win rates and run stop win rates for all players across the NFL. From that, they're also able to track the teams and sort of figure out a percentage of their win rates in those game situations. So a pass rush win rate is effectively how often your team, your defensive unit, is winning when they go to rush the passer. That's shedding blocks, that's getting hits on the quarterback, that's getting pressures, hurries, sacks, things like that. And it's just a percentage of time. It's not anything that sort of correlates or scales based upon the severity of the win, right? A win against that offensive lineman counts the same as a win as a sack. A hit on the quarterback counts as much as a hurry on the quarterback. It's all about the percentage of time that you win as a team. Run stop win rate, same thing, but in run defense. Are you able to get the stops? Are you able to stop teams game player? How do I say this? Are you able to stop run plays? There we go. For insufficient gains based on game situations, things like that as well, right? Like a 3-yard run is different on 3rd and 2 than it is on 1st and 10. So this sort of gives you the percentage of just a win that takes all of those different things into consideration. Good news for the New Orleans Saints is that run defense wise, they're not the number one team in the NFL, which is what we're used to, but they're right in the middle of the league right now. And through 3 games, you'll take that. Right now, they have a 30% run stop win rate. So they're winning in the run game 30% of the time. That makes them 17th in the NFL. Just for perspective, number 1 in the NFL are the Tennessee Titans and the Los Angeles Rams at 38%. So the Saints only 8% behind. If they're 2% better, they're in the top 10. It's not a very big gap. It's not a very big margin here when it comes to where the Saints rank in run stop win rate. So their efficiency in stopping the run. Their efficiency in generating pass rush, however, very concerning. The New Orleans Saints, number 32 in the NFL, dead last in pass rush win rate, 19%. And y'all, the gap is not close from 32 to 1. In fact, the gap is not close from 32 to 31. The gap between last place and second to last, which are the New England Patriots, are the New Orleans Saints at 19 and the New England Patriots at 30%. That's an 11% gap to move up to second worst in the NFL. That's not good. That ain't good at all. And just so you know, number 1 would be the Arizona Cardinals at 55%. So that's what, a 36% difference there. If the Saints were I don't know, 30% better than they'd be in the top 10. It's not looking great so far in terms of where the Saints' inefficiencies are in the pass rush game. Now, you do have to take into consideration who the opponents are, what they didn't try to do against different opponents when you look at pass rush as a whole. But these metrics are usually taken from pass rush plays, from moments where the pass rush is trying to get home, not playing contain against Marcus Mariota, not, dropping, dropping 7 back in coverage, and therefore you're kind of, not really going after Tom Brady as much because he's getting the ball out quickly and stuff like that. Now, your pass rush win rate does take a hit when you go up against Tom Brady. It does that to every defensive line. Used to not happen to the New Orleans Saints, did happen to the New Orleans Saints here in week 2. Now, they had a better week against the Carolina Panthers this week, got, multiple sacks, 4 different players credited with sacks, 3 sacks in terms of the team total, had a half sack in there with JT Gray and I believe it was Carl Granderson. But they got maybe a total of 14 pressures in that game. But that's better. That's better than where they were week 1 and week 2. So you wanted to see the pass rush come to life a little bit here against the Carolina Panthers. It did. So there's signs of life despite the fact that the New Orleans Saints are dead last in the NFL right now when it comes to ESPN's team pass rush win rate. The Saints do not have a player in the top 10 when it comes to individual pass rush win rate metrics for edge rushers or for interior defensive linemen. They do, though, have Cam Jordan as the number 10, so in the top 10 when it comes to run stop win rate for edge rushers. Flipping the script, though, so you're seeing where the New Orleans Saints are right now, which isn't great when it comes to the defensive line, but you saw the signs of life, the improvement last week. Hopefully you continue to see that here in London as they go up against another non-mobile quarterback, but a guy who still gets the ball out pretty quickly in Kirk Cousins when he's making the right decisions. We all know Kirk Cousins is like very hot and cold. So they have a chance to continue to build on their momentum there. Where they have performed extremely well is over in coverage. And I just want to use the Carolina Panthers game as a highlight here. The New Orleans Saints allowing the Carolina Panthers' biggest weapons, DJ Moore and Christian McCaffrey, to combine for only 3 catches for 9 yards. That was 2 catches by Christian McCaffrey for 7 yards, 1 catch by DJ Moore on 6 targets, by the way, for only 2 yards. And the thing that makes that so impressive for the New Orleans Saints is that DJ Moore, who is one of the most underrated players in the NFL, also had 0 yards of separation, according to Next Gen Stats, on those 6 targets and that 1 catch for 2 yards. 0 yards of separation. That's Marshawn Lattimore for you. That's a little bit of Bradley Roby for you too. Like Bradley Roby ended up in coverage in DJ Moore a couple of times, or on DJ Moore a couple of times as well. So for the Saints, there's your bread and butter. It's your secondary, which is exactly what you had hoped. And this is in a game too where Marcus May is out. You had PJ Williams playing safety. And outside of the big catch and run by Laviska Shenault, who averaged nearly 7 yards of separation on his targets, by the way, but keep in mind that he was only targeted, give me one moment, he was only targeted twice. So, that's a very, very small sample size for a very large number there. Usually, you're not really tracking these things until you're targeted like 5 times in a game or something like that. So, not a huge deal. But for New Orleans, it's clear that their pass coverage is where they're strongest this season. Not necessarily their run stopping, certainly not their pass rush right now. You'd love to get the symbiotic relationship between the pass rush and the pass coverage going. Remember, the Saints started slow when it came to pass rush last year as well, and then ended up being one of the better teams in terms of number of sacks by the time that the season was all said and done. They should be able to do something akin to that again this year if things, go in their usual trajectory. And as long as coverage continues to hold up here, you're going to start to see maybe some sacks that aren't necessarily happening 3 seconds into the snap clock, but instead, 4 or 5 seconds in because Cam Jordan's fighting through offensive linemen and the quarterback has nowhere to go with the ball and he's getting home. Those types of situations. So the Saints have sort of the 2 ingredients that they need right now, which are signs of life coming out of that Carolina Panthers game, and then coverage, really, really solid coverage on the back end to help them be able to get better in the front 7 as a pass rushing team. And thankfully, they're faring pretty well in the NFL so far when it comes to run stopping. So yeah, they're giving you a little bit of concern, but they're giving you a lot of confidence as well. This New Orleans Saints team has always been built, has always tried to build its identity off of the defense. They should be able to continue to do that with a couple of tweaks here as the season continues on. Coming up next, we're getting to your questions for our Twitter Tuesday to wrap up today's episode. We're going to start off with an update for you on Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Taysom Hill. Really, really good news on all fronts there so far. We'll have to see how everything plays out. I'll give you that update here as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with your questions for a little Twitter Tuesday action here as the New Orleans Saints get ready to take on the Minnesota Vikings here in London. And we're going to be here in London all week to bring you updates and everything all throughout the week. So let's get started here with little known law. It's at Baby Wins a Cigar on Twitter, who said, what's up with MT and Jarvis, Ross? So let me just give you a little bit of an update in terms of where the New Orleans Saints are in terms of all of their injuries, not just Michael Thomas and Jarvis, but we'll lead off there. I'll tell you this. According to several reports, Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry both dealing with a little bit of soreness, discomfort, stuff like that, but avoided any serious injury. That's per Ian Rappaport. That's per, Tom Pelissero. It's per a few other folks. So good news that the New Orleans Saints sort of dodged a little bit of the severe injury there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that just because they dodge serious injury that they're going to be available as early as this week. So practice throughout this week is going to be really, really informative. The good news on all the injury fronts outside of the players that are on injured reserve, you've got guys like Taysom Hill, who couldn't play last week, Deontay Hardy, who couldn't play last week, of course, Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry. You also had Traquan Smith leave, Andrus Peat leave with concussions in this game. Every single player made the trip here to London. That's good news. If there was somebody that didn't travel, then you can already immediately say, okay, that person is ruled out, but they all traveled. So that's good news, particularly the guys with concussions, right? Because they're getting on a flight the night of and everything. That team seems to be a little bit of a good sign, or at least a good signal. So they have to go through protocols. You know how it goes. Takes a little bit of time. You got to be limited. You got to kind of do some aerobic things like that. Then you have to work your way into a full practice before you can participate. So watching the practice day designations is going to be very informative when it comes to players with concussions. You're looking for limited practices from Michael Thomas, from Taysom Hill, and from Jarvis Landry. If you can get a full practice out of Taysom Hill, then great. But if you could just get limited across all three, then I think they each have a chance to play on Sunday. If there are any DNPs, then you get a little bit concerned. Remember too that the game is a little bit later relatively for these players, to where it's happening at 2:30 in their day here. So that might factor in a little bit too in terms of, some taking advantage of the opportunity to be a game time decision, because you have so much time to kind of work things through later on in the day. Okay, I spent a little bit longer on that than I wanted to, but it's good information. Y'all need to know. So next up, we'll go here to Yiki Durkin at Remington Thomas on Twitter. This one, he asks about if I'm worried about the New Orleans Saints' lack of takeaways over the defensive side, and also what's up with Honey Badger. It seems like he's missed like 3 tackles so far minimum. So Tyrann Mathieu missed tackles, Demario Davis has missed tackles, Marshawn Lattimore's missed tackles, Marcus May has missed tackles, Cam Jordan's missed tackles. There's been a lot of missed tackles actually by this New Orleans Saints team. Oh, PJ Williams, of course. So yeah, I mean, that to me is a bigger concern than the lack of takeaways, but the lack of takeaways is a concern. Just like we spoke about when we talked about how much of a star Chris Olave is turning into. If you want to really be able to take advantage of that, you got to be able to get the ball back into your offense's hands. So you want the takeaways there, but I say the tackling is almost more important, because if you can't stop the guys on offense or on the defensive side, you can't stop the opposing offense when they have the ball in their hands, then the only other option you have is to try to take the ball away, but then you're dealing with all these high scoring games. Remember 2014, 15, 16, sorry to evoke the years, but tackling was one of the biggest issues there. It's why the explosive plays happen. You notice that the Laviska Shenault play, which was the biggest explosive play that the Saints have let up so far this season, was a short pass that turned into an explosive play that probably should have only gained like 7 yards in terms of like ESPN and Next Gen stats and all of their estimates. The expected yardage on that was like 7 yards. It turned into 67 by the time that it was all said and done. Houston Hogan at Houston Hogan 07 asked, would a quarterback change make the offense better? Would it make the offense better? No. Could it help you with maybe some more efficiency and, kind of running more of a Drew Brees like offense where you're staying really close to the line of scrimmage? Sure. So if that's a better offense to you, yes. But if you like the ceiling and you like being able to take advantage of big plays, then I don't think that changing the offense is really changing the quarterback is what makes the offense better, if that's your definition of a better offense, right? If your better offense is one that stays close to the line of scrimmage and dinks and dunks and, can efficiently, meticulously move the ball downfield, then sure, then it makes your team better. But if that's not your definition of better, then no. And that might be one of the reasons why the New Orleans Saints aren't so quick to pull the trigger on making a change at the quarterback position. both things can be true, that Jameis Winston can be struggling and playing poorly right now, but can also still be your best option in terms of what the team wants to do. Both things can be true. And this one actually kind of comes from a couple of folks, Sherlock3 at Sherlock3TV on Twitter, as well as Mark Woods at MW Woods Jr. on Twitter, both asking how I feel about the offensive line. I think you have to go into next year's draft and free agency at least looking at interior offensive line help. Cesar Ruiz has taken some really nice steps forward. Actually, I thought he played well last week and the week before. But Andrew Speed's dealing with another injury. And at this point, you got to wonder, you got to start to prepare for a life without Andrew Speed, I think. And you root for him. You want him to be able to take steps forward. In fact, he's actually one of the guys right now on all of the pass blocking win ratings for guards, as well as run blocking win ratings for guards. He's actually pretty high up on the list on those over at ESPN. So he's performing well, but again, having more trouble staying healthy. Now it's a concussion. You can't really hold that against him or anything like that. I certainly wouldn't. But now you're back to kind of having to get ready for like life without him again. So you're consistently having to practice as if you're not going to have him. So you might as well start to build up behind him as if you're not going to have him. Calvin Throckmorton stepped in last week kind of on a whim. Maybe if he's able to, get in there from the very beginning of the game plan on, he performs a little bit better, although he didn't perform very poorly last week. I think that the Saints offensive line is also struggling right now with blitz identification more than they're struggling with just pure pass blocking or pure run blocking. Their issue has been, and this is a combination of Jameis Winston, Eric McCoy, and others, that, figuring out who's coming off the edge, who's blitzing, who's coming, who's staying, who's dropping back into coverage, all that. And then last week against the Carolina Panthers, they simply just continuously brought more defenders, more pass rushers than the Saints had offensive linemen or protection players. And so you have to be able to get the ball out quickly, but because the Saints are doing so much sort of top to bottom reads or high to low reads, i.e. you're waiting for plays to develop downfield and then checking down, as opposed to just taking what the defense is giving you immediately, you hold the ball a little bit longer. And that's by design. And so if you have these players to where you have these teams that are sending, 7, 8, and you've only got, 6 or 7 back to block or whatever, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have a bad time, as they'd say. And that's what the New Orleans Saints sort of fell victim to a couple of times last week. Not, they only gave up, the 1 sack, but J.C. Horn being able to get in, jump up, knock the ball in the air, ends up in an interception, additional pressures, things like that. So, the Carolina Panthers blitzed a lot in that game. And when you blitz a lot and you're bringing more than what the offense has to block, that means that the offense has to adjust to get the ball out quickly. Harder to do that in game, easier to do that on a week-to-week basis as they start to sort of build that identity for themselves. So that's why I mentioned in the postcast episode, one of the ways that you build the rhythm for this team early is that you start looking low to high. You start going to what the defense is giving you immediately. And you start going to the quick passes, the short passes, the ones that allow these guys, catch these guys in stride, let them get some yards after catch, things like that. So I would be interested to see if maybe that's the game plan the New Orleans Saints come out with here in London on Sunday, going up against the Minnesota Vikings. All right, y'all, coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're taking a look at a couple of the big plays and turning points for the New Orleans Saints in our Film Watch Wednesday. Hope to have some play diagrams for you to kind of help for those of you that are watching over on YouTube as well. So stay tuned for the big turning point breakdowns for the New Orleans Saints on last week's game against the Carolina Panthers, but then we'll also get you updated with everything you need to know on your New Orleans Saints as the week rolls along. We'll be visiting with Luke Braun on Thursday for our Locked On Vikings, Locked On Saints crossover, and then, of course, getting you sort of your final news and notes, everything you need to know going into the matchup on Friday. So I appreciate you so much, as always, for being here, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show every single Monday through Friday as well to get all of your NFL news and analytics less than 30 minutes every single Monday through Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. And go and check out Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison. New Orleans Pelicans media days kicked off on Monday. He's got everything that you need every single day over at Locked On Pelicans. Nobody doing it better when it comes to covering your favorite basketball team in the city. So go and check him out, Jake Madison, Locked On Pelicans. Appreciate y'all, as always, for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me over here on the other side, say hi. And of course, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.